The bamboo slats
Don't
of the
move.
barrack wall had a pattern.
Who are you?
15
You're
vertical
coming with
pieces
me.
held together
No,
by
please.
wire that had rusted to
Please,
the
you
color
have
of
to tell
dried
me.
blood.
I know
Li
you're
Minji
scared.
had counted them
But
every
what
day
if
for
they
3
come back?
years, 2 months, and 17 days.
This is for you.
She
Keep it
counted
safe.
them now, listening
you.
to the
I will.
silence. Silence was new. For as long as she had been in this place, there had been noise. Boots on wooden floors. Voices shouting orders. The generator that powered the lights humming through the tropical night. Music from the officers' quarters. The sounds of other women crying when they thought no one could hear. But this morning, October 24th, 1944, there was only silence and the whisper of wind through palm trees. Minji was 21 years old, though she felt ancient. She had been 17 when the men came to her village outside Busan with promises of factory work in Manchuria. Good wages, they said, respectable employment, a chance to serve the greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. Her father had been dead for 2 years. Her mother struggled to feed Minji and her 3 younger siblings. The money seemed like salvation. The train had not gone to Manchuria. It had gone south through Korea and across the sea to the Philippines. By the time Minji understood what was happening, escape was impossible. The compound where she was taken sat in jungle 30 kilometers from any town, surrounded by fences and guards, in the kind of isolation that made resistance pointless. The first night, an officer had explained the rules. She would serve the Imperial Japanese Army. She would do whatever was asked. Refusal meant death, but not quick death. He had been very specific about that. Minji had survived by learning to leave her body, to let her mind drift somewhere else while the soldiers came and went, to count bamboo slats and memorize the pattern of rust on wire and recite poetry she had learned in school. Anything to be somewhere other than the present moment. But this morning was different. The soldiers were gone. She had noticed it yesterday evening when the usual routine failed to happen. No roll call, no officers inspecting the barracks. The guards at the gate had disappeared sometime in the night. Through the gaps in the bamboo, Minji could see the other women emerging cautiously from their quarters. There were 11 of them left. There had been 18 when Minji arrived, but disease and despair had reduced their numbers. 2 had taken their own lives. 5 had died from illnesses that would have been treatable anywhere else. Now the survivors stood in the compound yard looking at each other with the wary confusion of prisoners who have discovered their cell doors open. "They have abandoned us," someone said in Korean. It was Park Jin-suk, the oldest among them at 32. She had been here the longest, nearly 5 years. The Americans must be coming. The word Americans sent a ripple of fear through the group. They had been told about Americans, told in vivid detail what would happen if the enemy forces found them. The Japanese soldiers had been very clear that death by one's own hand was preferable to capture by American devils who would do things even worse than what the women had already endured. "We should run," another woman said. This was Chen Wei, one of 3 Chinese women in the group. "Into the jungle. Hide until we know it is safe." "Where will we run to?" Jin-suk's voice was bitter. "We are in the middle of nowhere. No money, no papers, no way to get home. At least here there is shelter." Minji said nothing. She was trying to remember what she knew about Americans. Before the war, before everything she had learned, some English, in school. She remembered a teacher who had studied in the United States, who talked about tall buildings and on automobiles and people who smiled easily. But that was before propaganda posters showing Americans as demons. Before soldiers told stories about what enemy forces did to Asian women. Before 3 years of systematic conditioning that taught her all outsiders meant harm. She did not know what to believe anymore. The discussion continued for hours. Some wanted to flee. Others argued for staying put. A few, the ones most broken by their ordeal, seemed indifferent to whatever fate awaited. Minji listened and counted bamboo slats and wondered if it was possible to feel hope after hope had been beaten out of you. The answer came late that afternoon when they heard the trucks. The sound came from the access road engines growling through the jungle, multiple vehicles moving fast. The women scattered immediately, pure instinct driving them to hide. Minji found herself pressed against the wall of the barracks, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Through the bamboo, she watched as 3 trucks rolled into the compound. They were different from Japanese military vehicles. Larger, darker green with white stars painted on their sides. Men jumped down, spreading out with weapons ready, shouting to each other in a language that was definitely not Japanese. English, Minji realized. They were speaking English. The Americans had come. She watched as the soldiers moved through the compound, clearing buildings with the efficiency of men who had done this many times before. They were young, most of them not so different in age from the Japanese soldiers who had been here yesterday. But they moved differently, more carefully, less like conquerors and more like men afraid of what they might find. One of them approached the barracks where Minji hid. He was tall, with dark hair and a face that looked too young for the rifle he carried. He pushed open the door slowly, calling out something Minji did not understand. She pressed herself flatter against the wall, willing herself to be invisible. Her hand found the piece of wire she had hidden in her sleeve, sharp enough to open veins if necessary. She had promised herself months ago that she would choose her own death before allowing anyone else to inflict it. The soldier entered the barracks, his footsteps heavy on the wooden floor. He was looking around carefully, and Minji knew it was only a matter of seconds before he saw her. When his eyes found hers, they both froze. Minji stared at this enemy soldier, this American devil, and prepared to use the wire. But the soldier did not raise his weapon. He did not shout or advance. He just stood there, and the expression on his face was not what she expected. He looked sad. The soldier slowly lowered his rifle, pointing it at the floor. He raised one hand, palm out, in what might have been a gesture of peace. Then he spoke, his voice quiet and careful. "It is okay. You are safe now." Minji understood the English words, but they made no sense. Safe. The concept seemed impossible. The soldier tried again, speaking more slowly. "We are Americans. We will not hurt you. Do you understand?" Minji's voice came out as barely a whisper. "English. I speak little English." The soldier's face transformed. Relief flooded his features. "You speak English. That is good. That is very good." He lowered himself to a crouch, making himself smaller, less threatening. "My name is Private James Walker from Oregon. What is your name?" Minji's brain struggled to process this. A soldier asking her name as if it mattered, as if she was a person rather than a thing. "Lee Minji," she managed. "From Korea." "Korea," James repeated. "You are a long way from home, Minji." He spoke her name carefully, trying to get the pronunciation right. "How did you get here?" The question was so vast, Minji could not begin to answer it. "How did you explain 3 years of systematic degradation in a language you barely spoke to a stranger who seemed impossibly kind?" "They brought me," she said finally. "Japanese soldiers, said factory work, not factory." She watched understanding dawn on James's face. He closed his eyes briefly, and when he opened them again, they were bright with something that might have been tears. "I'm so sorry," he said quietly. "I am so sorry that happened to you." Minji did not know what to do with an apology. No one had apologized to her in 3 years. The cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. "Are more women here?" James asked. "Others like you," Minji nodded. 10 others, hiding. "Will you help me find them? Tell them they are safe." James stood slowly, keeping his movements predictable. "We have medics, doctors, food. We want to help." "Why?" The question burst out before Minji could stop it. "Why help enemy?" James looked at her with infinite sadness. "You are not the enemy. You never were." Something inside Minji's chest cracked. Not broke, but cracked, letting in a sliver of light after 3 years of darkness. She stood on shaking legs and led James out of the barracks. Over the next hour, Minji helped the American soldiers find the other women. It was slow work. Each woman had to be coaxed from hiding, had to be convinced through words and gestures that these new soldiers meant no harm. Some believed quickly. Others took longer. Park Jin-suk refused to come out until Minji physically held her hand and walked her into the open. The Americans brought blankets and water and small packets of food. They set up a perimeter around the compound, not to keep the women in, but to keep danger out. Medical personnel arrived, including a woman in uniform who introduced herself as Lieutenant Sarah Chen, a nurse. Lieutenant Chen spoke some Chinese, which helped with Wei and the other Chinese women. But more important than language was her approach. She moved slowly, explained everything before doing it, asked permission before touching anyone. She treated them like human beings who deserved dignity. This was the shocking part, not the liberation itself, though, that was stunning enough, but the way these Americans treated them with a gentleness that felt revolutionary after years of cruelty. Private Walker stayed near Minji, and she found his presence oddly comforting. He talked to her in simple English, explaining what was happening, asking if she needed anything, making sure she understood that she could refuse any help offered. "We have a field hospital about 10 miles from here," he said as evening approached. "Clean beds, real doctors, good food. We want to take you there tomorrow. Get you checked out, make sure you are healthy. Is that okay with you?" Minji nodded, still processing the concept of being asked rather than told. "You can say no," James added. "This is your choice. Everything from now on is your choice." Choice, another impossible concept. Minji turned the word over in her mind like an object from an alien world. That night, the women slept in the barracks for the last time, but with a difference. American soldiers stood guard outside, not to imprison, but to protect. Minji lay awake listening to their quiet voices, the occasional laugh, the normal sounds of men who were not monsters. She thought about the wire in her sleeve, the instrument of final escape she had carried for so long. Slowly, carefully, she worked it free and dropped it through a gap in the floorboards. She did not know if she would need it again. But for tonight, for this one night, she chose to believe she would not. In the darkness, she heard crying. Not the silent tears women learned to shed in captivity, but open sobbing. It was Chen Wei curled in her blanket, shaking with the force of her grief. Minji crossed the small space between them and put her arms around Wei. Other women joined them, drawn by the sound. They held each other, these survivors, and for the first time in years they cried, not from despair, but from the overwhelming shock of discovering that kindness existed. Outside, Private James Walker stood guard and listened to the weeping. He had seen combat-watched friends die killed enemy soldiers in the brutal island-hopping campaign through the Pacific. He thought he had seen the worst of war. But discovering what had been done to these women, seeing the fear in their eyes and the marks on their bodies, and the way they flinched from any sudden movement, made him understand war in a new way. Not just as combat between armies, but as systematic destruction of the most vulnerable. His squad leader, Sergeant Frank Martinez, came to stand beside him. Martinez was older, 35, a veteran who had been fighting since Guadalcanal. He lit a cigarette and stared out at the jungle. "Hell of a thing," Martinez said quietly. "Finding them like this." "Yeah. Command says there are probably dozens of these places, maybe hundreds, all over the Pacific, wherever the Japanese had military bases." Martinez took a long drag. "Makes you wonder how many we will not find in time." James thought about Minji's face when she first saw him, the absolute terror in her eyes. He thought about how she had expected him to hurt her and had been shocked, literally shocked, when he offered water instead. "We have to treat them right," James said. "Everything we do now, every interaction, it matters. We are showing them that not all soldiers are the same." Martinez nodded. "Command briefed us on that. Geneva Convention rules, medical care, respect, transport them to safety, get them medical attention, help them get home when possible." He paused. "Some of them probably cannot go home. The shame of it. Asian cultures, they are rough on women who have been, Then we help them build new lives, whatever they need." "You getting attached there, Walker?" James shook his head. "Just doing what is right. That girl in there, Minji, she speaks English. She is smart, probably educated before all this. She should have been teaching school or working in an office, not locked in a jungle compound being used by soldiers." "War is hell," Martinez said. It was a cliché, but no less true for being one. They stood in silence, listening to the night sounds of the jungle and the fading sounds of women crying. Tomorrow they would load the survivors onto trucks and drive them to the field hospital. Tomorrow would begin the long, complicated process of healing. But tonight all they could do was stand guard and make sure that no more harm came to women who had endured more than anyone should have to endure. Inside the barracks, Minji finally stopped crying. She lay in her blanket, exhausted but unable to sleep, her mind racing with too many thoughts to process. 3 years of captivity. 3 years of surviving by becoming numb. And now, in the space of a few hours, everything had changed. She did not know if she could trust it, did not know if this kindness was real or just another form of control more sophisticated than the last. But she knew that tomorrow she would get on that truck. She would go to the hospital. She would take the next step and the one after that, because the alternative was going back to the numbness, and she had just discovered that she did not want to be numb anymore. She wanted to feel, even if feeling hurt. She wanted to be a person again, not a thing. Park Jin-suk's voice came from the darkness. Minji, are you awake? Yes. Do you think they're telling the truth, the Americans? Minji thought about Private Walker's sad eyes and Lieutenant Chen's gentle hands in the way the soldiers had asked permission before doing anything. I think maybe yes, she said slowly. I think maybe they are different. I hope so, Jin-suk whispered. I am so tired of being afraid. Me too. They fell silent. Around them, the other women breathed quietly, some sleeping, some awake, all of them suspended in the strange space between the nightmare that had been and the unknown that was coming. Minji closed her eyes and tried to imagine tomorrow. Clean sheets, real doctors, food that was not the minimum to keep them alive. The possibility of being treated like a human being. It seemed impossible, but then again, so had survival. And here she was still breathing, still thinking, still capable of hoping, even after everything designed to destroy hope. She slept finally, and for the first time in 3 years, she did not dream of escape. She dreamed of her mother's face in her village and the sound of her youngest sister laughing. She dreamed of before. And when she woke to find American soldiers offering breakfast and speaking in quiet voices and treating her with respect, she understood that perhaps there could be an after too. The trucks arrived at dawn. Lieutenant Chen and her medical team helped the women board, explaining where they were going and what would happen when they arrived. Some women were eager. Others were terrified, years of conditioning, making them certain that this was another trap. Minji sat in the truck bed beside Private Walker, who had been assigned to accompany them to the hospital. He pointed out landmarks as they drove, narrating their journey in simple English that Minji could follow. That is the coast. See the ocean? We landed there 2 weeks ago. The fighting was bad, but it is over now in this area. You are safe. Safe. That word again. Minji was not sure she knew what it meant anymore. The field hospital was a sprawl of tents and temporary buildings near the town of Tacloban. Lieutenant Chen led the women to a designated area where beds had been prepared and medical supplies laid out. Everything was clean, organized, purposeful. We will examine everyone, Chen explained through Minji's translation. Check for injuries, diseases, malnutrition. Whatever you need, we will try to provide. This may take a few days. Is everyone okay with staying here? The women looked at each other. They had no alternative, but the fact that they were being asked felt significant. We stay, Jin-suk said, and the others nodded. What followed was the beginning of healing, though none of them would have called it that yet. Doctors examined them with a gentleness they had forgotten existed. Nurses treated their wounds and illnesses with medicines that actually worked. They were given clean clothes, hot food, and beds with real mattresses. But more shocking than the physical care was the psychological shift. No one demanded anything from them. No one treated them as objects. The doctors asked permission before touching. The nurses explained procedures before doing them. The soldiers assigned to guard the medical area kept their distance and averted their eyes respectfully. It was as if these Americans saw them as people. Minji found this harder to process than the physical care. Her body understood food and medicine and sleep, but her mind struggled with the concept of dignity being restored. It felt too good to be true, which meant it probably was not true, which meant she should prepare for the moment when the mask fell and the real intentions were revealed. But days passed and the mask did not fall. The kindness continued. And slowly, incrementally, Minji began to believe it might be real. The field hospital operated on a rhythm that took Minji days to understand. Wake at dawn, breakfast in the mess tent, medical appointments, therapy sessions, meals at regular intervals, free time in the afternoon, lights out at 2200 hours. It was structured, but not oppressive. Rules existed, but they were designed for health and order, not control. The difference was subtle but profound. Minji had been at the hospital for 2 weeks when she met Captain Elizabeth Morrison, the psychiatrist assigned to their case. Morrison was perhaps 40 years old with prematurely gray hair and eyes that seemed to see more than Minji wanted to reveal. Their first session was tense. Minji sat in a chair across from Morrison, every muscle taut, ready to bolt or fight or disappear into herself. Morrison seemed to sense this. She spent the first 30 minutes just talking, not asking questions, just sharing information about herself. I grew up in Iowa, Morrison said. Her voice was calm, almost hypnotic. Small town, nothing much to do. I studied psychology because I wanted to understand why people do the things they do. Joined the army because I thought I could help soldiers cope with the combat stress. But I have learned that war damages more than just soldiers. She paused, looking directly at Minji. I am here to help if you want help. But this only works if you want to participate. I cannot force you to talk. I cannot force you to heal. That has to be your choice. Choice again. Americans seemed obsessed with the concept. What if I do not want to talk? Minji asked. Her English had improved rapidly with daily use, though she still struggled with complex thoughts. Then we sit in silence for an hour, and that is okay too. Morrison smiled slightly. Though it might get boring. Despite herself, Minji felt her lips twitch. Not quite a smile, but close. I talk little, she said. Not ready for everything. That is completely reasonable. We can start with small things, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. They did start with small things. Minji talked about her village, about her family, about the school she attended before the war. Safe topics, memories from before. Morrison listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed she was genuinely interested rather than just collecting information. The sessions became easier. Not easy, never that, but less painful. Minji began to look forward to them, to the hour where she could talk about anything without fear of punishment, where her words mattered. One afternoon, 3 weeks into her stay, Minji was sitting in the common area when Park Jin-suk approached with a letter. Jin-suk's hands were shaking. The Red Cross, Jin-suk said in Korean. They found my family. They are alive. My parents, my brother, they want me to come home. Minji felt joy and terror in equal measure. Joy that Jin-suk had family who wanted her. Terror at what it meant for herself. That is wonderful, she managed. Is it? Jin-suk's voice broke. Minji, they do not know what happened. The letter just says I was working in a factory and got caught when the war reached the Philippines. My brother, he is very traditional. If he knew the truth, she did not need to finish. They both understood what Asian families often did with daughters who had been dishonored, even when the dishonor was not their fault. So you do not tell them, Minji said. You survived. How you survived is your business. Can I live with that lie? Better than dying with the truth. Jin-suk laughed, but it was a bitter sound. When did we become so cynical? When the world taught us to be. Jin-suk left for Korea 3 days later. Minji and the other women gathered to say goodbye. They had become a family of sorts, these survivors. Bound not by blood, but by shared experience and the understanding that came from walking the same dark path. After Jin-suk left, Minji felt the hospital walls pressing in. She asked Lieutenant Chen if she could go outside the compound just for a walk. Chen arranged for a private walker to accompany her both as protection and as someone who could translate if needed. They walked along a path that led to the beach. The ocean stretched to the horizon, blue and vast and indifferent to human suffering. Minji stood at the water's edge and breathed in salt air. Beautiful, she said quietly. James stood a respectful distance away. It is. Sometimes I forget there is beauty in the world. War makes you forget. Minji turned to look at him. You fight in battles. Yeah, since Guadalcanal. That was back in 42. Feels like a lifetime ago. You kill people. James flinched but answered honestly. Yes, Japanese soldiers. It was them or me. So we are enemies, Minji said. You and me. Japanese took me from Korea. You fight Japanese. We are on same side maybe, but I am Asian. You must hate Asians. No, James's response was immediate and forceful. I do not hate Asians. I hate war. I hate what it does to people. The soldiers I killed, they probably did not want to be there either. They were just following orders same as me. And you did not choose any of this. You are not my enemy. You never were. Minji processed this. It was a different way of thinking about war than what she had been taught. Not us versus them, but all of us versus the machine that ground people up, regardless of which flag they saluted. In Korea, we learned Japan was our protector, she said slowly. Greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere. We all work together, they said. Make Asia strong. But it was lies. They took our language, our names, our daughters. They made us Japanese, but treated us like slaves. Yeah, that is what empires do. They dress up exploitation as liberation. James picked up a smooth stone and skipped it across the water. America is not perfect either. We have done terrible things too. But at least here, at least now, we are trying to do something right. Trying to help people who need help. Why? Minji asked. It was the same question she had asked in the barracks 2 weeks ago, but she needed to understand. Why care about Korean girls used by Japanese soldiers? Not your problem. James thought about this for a long moment. Because if I stop caring about people just because they are not American, then what am I fighting for? If I can watch suffering and shrug it off because it is not my suffering, then I am part of the problem. The war taught me that we are all connected. What happens to you matters to me, even though we just met, even though we come from different worlds. Minji felt tears threatening. She had trained herself not to cry in front of men, but James was making it difficult. You are strange American, she said, trying to lighten the mood. James laughed. Yeah, I get that a lot. They walked in silence for a while, watching waves roll in and out. Minji felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not happiness, that was still too far away. But peace, the absence of immediate threat, the possibility of existing without pain for a few moments. Can I ask you something? James said eventually. Okay. What do you want after this, when you are healthy and the war is over? What do you want your life to be? No one had asked Minji that question in 3 years. She had stopped thinking about the future because the future was unimaginable. But now, standing on a beach in the Philippines with an American soldier who treated her like a person, the question felt worth considering. I do not know, she admitted. Before I wanted to be teacher, teach Korean language and literature. But I cannot go back to that, cannot pretend nothing happened. Why not? You survived. That does not make you less capable of teaching. In Korea, a woman like me is shameful. Family will reject. Community will whisper. No school will hire me. Then do not go back to Korea, James said simply. Stay somewhere else. Teach somewhere else. Build a different life. Where I have no money, no papers, no skills, except what I learned in hell. You speak 3 languages, Korean, Japanese, English. You are intelligent, educated, strong. You have skills. James turned to face her. The world is going to need people like you, people who understand different cultures, who can bridge divides. There will be opportunities if you want them. Minji wanted to believe him, but the gap between her current reality and the future he described felt impossibly wide. I think about it, she said finally. Not promise, but I think about it. That is enough, James said. Thinking about the future means you believe you have one. That is a big step. They walked back to the hospital as the sun began to set. Minji felt lighter somehow, as if sharing the weight of her uncertainty had made it more bearable. That evening, she joined several other women in the common area. Chen Wei was teaching them to fold paper cranes, an art she had learned from her mother. The delicate work required focus and precision, which made it meditative. As Minji worked folding and unfolding paper until she got the technique right, she listened to the conversations around her. The women were starting to talk about the future. Some wanted to go home despite the shame. Others were considering staying in the Philippines or going elsewhere. All of them were grappling with the same question: what do we do with the rest of our lives? Lieutenant Chen joined them, sitting cross-legged on the floor and accepting a piece of paper to fold her own crane. She was good at it, her hands quick and sure. In China, we say 1,000 cranes bring good fortune, Wei said. Maybe we make 1,000. Bring fortune for all of us. We start tonight, Chen said. Everyone makes 10. In 100 days, we have our 1,000. It became a ritual. Every evening, the women gathered to fold cranes. They talked as they worked, sharing stories and fears and hopes. The repetitive motion was soothing, and the growing pile of cranes became a visible symbol of their progress. Each crane was a day survived, a day closer to healing. Minji found herself talking more during these sessions, opening up in ways she could not in her private therapy. The other women understood in ways that even sympathetic Americans could not. They had lived the same nightmare. Their healing had to be collective as well as individual. One evening, about 6 weeks into her stay, Captain Morrison brought a visitor to their session. A Korean woman, maybe 50 years old, wearing traditional hanbok. This is Mrs. Kim, Morrison said. She works with the International Red Cross, helping displaced Koreans find their families. She has agreed to help all of you navigate the process of contact and potential repatriation. Mrs. Kim spoke in rapid Korean that felt like water after years in a desert. Minji had not spoken her native language with anyone but other survivors since her capture. Hearing it from someone new, someone from home, brought emotions flooding back. Mrs. Kim was kind but practical. She explained the process for contacting families, the forms that needed to be filled out, the realistic timeline for responses. She also, and this was crucial, acknowledged the shame issue directly. Many families will welcome you back, she said, but some will not. I must be honest about this. Korean culture is not always kind to women who have been victimized, even when the victimization was not their fault. You must prepare for possible rejection. The words hurt, but Minji appreciated the honesty. Better to know what to expect than to build false hopes. However, Mrs. Kim continued, there are also communities forming, other survivors, people who understand, organizations working to help women restart their lives. You will not be alone, whatever you choose. Minji decided not to contact her family yet. The wound was too fresh, and she was not ready to face potential rejection. Instead, she focused on the present, on healing her body and mind, on learning new skills. Lieutenant Chen helped her get work in the hospital kitchen preparing meals for patients. It was simple work, but it gave Minji purpose and a sense of contributing rather than just receiving. She was good at it, discovering she enjoyed the meditative quality of chopping vegetables and the satisfaction of creating something nourishing. The kitchen staff, mostly Filipino locals with a few American soldiers, treated her with casual friendliness that felt revelatory. They joked and sang and complained about the heat and acted like normal people doing a normal job. Minji found herself relaxing around them, even laughing occasionally at their antics. One of the cooks, a Filipino woman named Rosa, took Minji under her wing. Rosa was perhaps 35, plump and cheerful, and endlessly curious. You speak English? Good, Rosa said one afternoon as they peeled potatoes. Where you learn? School. Before war. Before war I sell fish in market. Rosa grinned. Life is strange, no war come market destroyed. Now I cook for American Army. When war end, maybe I cook for Japanese tourists. Who knows? The casualness with which Rosa spoke about the future, as if it was certain to arrive, comforted Minji. Rosa had survived Japanese occupation. Her village had been burned, her father killed. Yet here she was joking and planning and living. You are not angry, Minji asked. Japanese killed your father. Rosa's expression grew serious. Oh, I am angry, very angry, but I am also alive. And being angry all the time, that kills you too, just slower. So I cook and I laugh and I make plans. I take back my life from people who tried to destroy it. It was a philosophy Minji was beginning to understand. Healing was not about forgetting. It was about choosing to live fully despite remembering. Private Walker visited regularly, ostensibly to check on how Minji was doing, but really she suspected because he was lonely too. They had developed an unlikely friendship based on their shared status as outsiders. He was a soldier who questioned war. She was a survivor learning to be human again. Both of them were trying to make sense of a world that seemed determined not to make sense. I got a letter from home, James told her during one visit. My mom wants to know when I am coming back. She is worried. You tell her? I told her I am safe and doing important work. Didn't give details. He looked uncomfortable. How do you explain this? Finding women who were enslaved, helping them recover. It is important, maybe the most important thing I have done in this war, but I cannot put that in a letter to my mom. You tell her you help people, Minji suggested. That is enough. Yeah, I guess. James was quiet for a moment. I have been thinking about what I will do after the war. I do not want to go back to Oregon and pretend this never happened. I want to do something that matters. Like what? Maybe teaching or social work. Something where I help people who need help. The war showed me there is so much suffering in the world. I cannot fix all of it, but maybe I can fix a little bit. Minji smiled. You sound like Captain Morrison. Is that bad? No, is good. World needs people who want to help. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Mrs. Kim with news. She had been contacted by the family of one of the Chinese women. They wanted her to come home. There was crying and celebration and fear all mixed together. Watching the other woman prepare to leave, Minji felt the tug of her own homesickness. She missed Korea, missed her mother and siblings, missed the language and food and familiar rhythms of life. But she was not ready yet, not ready to face questions she could not answer, not ready to carry shame that should not be hers, not ready to leave the fragile safety of the hospital where people treated her with dignity. Captain Morrison helped her understand this was okay during their next session. Healing is not linear, Morrison explained. You do not move steadily from broken to whole. You move in circles covering the same ground multiple times, each time from a slightly different angle. Right now, you are in a safe place. You are building strength. When you are ready to face the next challenge, you will know. What if I am never ready? Then you build a different life. There is no rule that says you must return to Korea. You can create home somewhere new. The idea was both terrifying and liberating. Minji had always assumed survival meant returning to her old life. But what if survival meant creating something entirely new? She began to consider possibilities. Maybe she could work for the Red Cross helping other survivors. Maybe she could teach Korean to American soldiers. Maybe she could study nursing and work in a hospital. The future spread before her like an unmapped territory, frightening but full of potential. 3 months after liberation, Minji stood on the same beach where she had walked with James. But this time she was alone. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The ocean whispered against the shore. She thought about the girl who had counted bamboo slats in a barracks, who had prepared to die rather than live with more pain, who had walked out of captivity expecting violence and found kindness instead. That girl still existed inside her. The trauma did not disappear just because Americans were kind or because she was safe. The nightmares still came. The fear still surfaced. The shame still whispered that she was dirty and broken and worthless. But something else existed too now. A small, stubborn part of herself that wanted to live, that believed healing was possible, that dared to imagine a future where she was more than just a victim who survived. Minji picked up a handful of sand and let it slip through her fingers. She had not forgiven. She might never forgive, but she was beginning to accept that she deserved to keep living, that survival was not betrayal, that the rest of her life did not have to be defined by the worst years. She whispered a prayer in Korean, not to any specific God, but to the universe itself, to her younger self who had gotten on that train, to the women who had not survived, to the future self she was trying to become. I am still here, she said to the ocean. I am still here and I am going to keep going. The ocean had no answer, but the sun kept setting and the stars began to appear, and Minji turned back toward the hospital with steady steps. She was not healed, but she was healing, and that was enough for today. I should complete part 3 to reach the required 5,000 words. Let me continue. The war ended in August of 1945. Minji heard about it in the hospital mess hall, where someone had a radio playing. The announcer's voice crackled through static reporting Japanese surrender following atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The room fell silent. Minji felt nothing at first, then everything at once. Relief, horror, grief for the civilians who had died in those bombings, rage at the government that had brought such destruction upon its own people through stubborn refusal to surrender, confusion about what came next. It is over, Chenwei said beside her, and the war is finally over. But was it? The fighting might have stopped, but the consequences would echo for decades. The women in this hospital alone represented just a tiny fraction of those whose lives had been destroyed. There would be no clean ending for them. Neat resolution. Over the following weeks, the hospital processed women for repatriation. Some chose to return home. Others, like Minji, remained uncertain. The decision felt impossibly heavy. Captain Morrison helped Minji work through her options methodically. Let us make a list, Morrison suggested during one session. Reasons to return to Korea, reasons to stay or go elsewhere. Minji wrote in careful English, return to Korea, see family, speak my language, familiar culture, home, not return shame, questions, pain of memories, cannot explain, stay/go elsewhere, freedom to build new life. No one knows my history, but alone, no family, everything strange. Looking at the list made the dilemma clear. Every choice involved loss. What if, Morrison said slowly, you took a middle path, Return to Korea, see your family, gauge their reaction. Then decide whether to stay or leave. Keep your options open. It was practical advice. But it required courage Minji was not sure she possessed. The decision was made for her when Mrs. Kim returned with a letter. It had taken 6 months to route through Red Cross channels, but her mother had responded to the initial contact. Minji's hands shook as she opened the envelope. The letter was short, written in her mother's familiar handwriting. My beloved daughter, I thought you were dead. For 3 years I have mourned you. To learn you are alive is a miracle I do not deserve. Please come home. I do not care what happened. I only care that you survived. Your sisters ask about you every day. We all want to see you. Please come home to us. Minji read the letter 5 times, tears streaming down her face. Her mother wanted her, did not care what had happened, just wanted her home. It felt too good to be true. Show me, Lieutenant Chen said when she found Minji crying in the courtyard. She read the letter carefully, then smiled. This is wonderful news. Your mother loves you. She does not know, Minji said. She does not know what I did, what was done to me. Does it matter? She knows something happened. She still wants you home. When she learns truth, she will change mind. Chen sat beside her on the bench. Maybe, or maybe she will surprise you, but you will not know unless you go. The journey home took 2 months to arrange. Ships were scarce, documentation complicated. But eventually Minji found herself on a transport vessel heading north, part of a larger repatriation effort that included former prisoners of war, displaced civilians, and refugees of all kinds. Private Walker came to see her off. They stood on the dock in Manila, the ship waiting behind them, and tried to find words for goodbye. Thank you, Minji said finally, for seeing me as human when I forgot I was. James looked uncomfortable with the gratitude. You did that yourself. I just offered water. You did the hard work of healing. Will you remember me? Always, James said seriously. You taught me something important. About resilience. About courage. About what it means to survive with dignity intact. They shook hands, formal and slightly awkward. Then impulsively, Minji hugged him. He stiffened in surprise, but returned the embrace carefully. Be happy, Minji whispered. You too. She boarded the ship with Chen Wei and 3 other Korean women from the hospital. They stood at the rail as the vessel pulled away, watching the Philippines recede into the distance. Minji felt like she was leaving part of herself behind, the part that had learned to hope again. The voyage took 5 days. Minji spent most of it on deck, watching the ocean and thinking about what waited in Korea. Would her mother truly accept her? Would her sisters understand? Could she ever tell them the truth? When the ship docked in Busan, Minji stood frozen. This was her country, her city, but it felt foreign now. She had left as a girl and returned as a woman shaped by trauma and survival. Mrs. Kim helped the women through customs and documentation. Then she brought them to a temporary shelter run by the Red Cross where families could come to collect their daughters. Minji waited in a room with 12 other women, all of them trembling with anticipation and fear. One by one, families arrived. There were tears and reunions and joy, and there were rejections. One father took one look at his daughter and walked away without speaking. The girl collapsed sobbing. Mrs. Kim held her and whispered comfort, but the damage was done. Minji watched this and felt her own fear intensify. What if her mother changed her mind upon seeing her? What if the reality was worse than the abstract concept? Then the door opened and her mother stood there. She looked older, thinner, gray hair where there had been black. But her eyes were the same, and when they found Minji across the room, they filled with tears. Minji, her mother said. Just her name, nothing else. Minji crossed the room on shaking legs. They stood facing each other for a long moment. Then her mother opened her arms, and Minji fell into them, becoming a child again in her mother's embrace. They cried together, rocking back and forth while the other women in the room smiled or looked away to give them privacy. You came home, her mother whispered in Korean. My daughter came home. The reunion was not simple or easy. Minji's sisters had questions. Her neighbors whispered. Her mother's friends asked pointed questions about where she had been and what had happened. Minji told a sanitized version. Factory work in the Philippines. Got caught when the fighting started. Liberated by Americans. It was true as far as it went. Some people believed her. Others clearly did not, but were polite enough not to press. A few made their skepticism known with sideways glances and knowing smirks. Minji endured it all because she had her mother's unconditional support. And because she had learned something crucial during her months of healing, she did not need everyone to understand or approve. She only needed to survive and build a life worth living. But Korea in 1946 was not an easy place to do that. The country was in chaos, occupied by foreign powers split into zones that would eventually become two separate nations. Jobs were scarce, resources were limited, and women like Minji with interrupted education and years of missing history struggled to find their place. 6 months after returning, Minji made a difficult decision. She would go to Japan. It seemed counterintuitive. Return to the country that had enslaved her. But Japan offered something Korea could not: anonymity. In Japan, she was just another Korean among thousands. Her history was hers to share or hide as she chose. More importantly, the American occupation forces in Japan needed translators, people who spoke Korean, Japanese, and English. Minji spoke all three. She applied for a position and was accepted. In the spring of 1947, she moved to Tokyo to work for the Allied Occupation Administration. The work was difficult but meaningful. She translated documents, interpreted meetings, helped Korean residents navigate Japanese bureaucracy. She was good at it, discovering a talent for bridging cultures that her experiences had given her. Tokyo was being rebuilt from ashes. Everywhere Minji looked, she saw construction. New buildings rising where old ones had burned. People working together to create something from nothing. It felt appropriate somehow. She was rebuilding too. She made friends. Other translators, mostly women, some of them survivors of various war traumas. They did not pry into each other's past. They focused on the present and future. Minji lived in a small apartment in a neighborhood that had been flattened by bombs and was now slowly coming back to life. She walked to work every morning, stopped at the same shop for tea every afternoon, and spent evenings reading or folding paper cranes. She had made 1,000 cranes, then another 1,000. They filled her apartment, hanging from the ceiling in colorful clusters. Each one was a prayer for peace, for healing, for the future. One day in 1948, Minji was working at her desk when someone spoke her name. She looked up to see a familiar face. Private James Walker, now Mr. Walker, civilian translator, like herself. "Minji, I thought it was you, but I could not be certain." She stood stunned. "James, what are you doing here?" "Working for the occupation, same as you apparently. I got your job information from the personnel office. Took a chance you might remember me." They went for tea after work. James explained that he had left the army and enrolled in university on the GI Bill, studying Asian languages and international relations. When the occupation administration needed translators, he had applied. "I could not go back to normal life," he said, "after everything we saw. I needed to do something that mattered." This seemed like it mattered. Minji understood completely. "I feel the same way. Cannot pretend war did not happen. Must use what I learned." They became friends again, or perhaps for the first time properly. The dynamic was different without the power imbalance of soldier and rescued prisoner. They were equals now, colleagues, two people trying to build meaningful lives from the wreckage of war. James introduced Minji to other American personnel who treated her with respect and professionalism. She introduced him to Korean and Japanese cultural nuances that helped him do his job better. They supported each other. Over time, their friendship deepened into something more. Neither of them rushed it. Both carried too much trauma to approach romance casually. But gradually, carefully, they built something genuine. "I love you," James said one evening as they watched the sun set over Tokyo Bay. "I have loved you for a long time, but I need you to know there is no pressure. If you do not feel the same way, or if you are not ready for this kind of a relationship, that is completely okay." Minji turned to look at him. This man who had offered her water when she expected violence, who had seen her at her most broken and still treated her with dignity, who had become her friend and companion and the person she trusted most in the world. "I love you too," she said. "But I am damaged. I have nightmares. I cannot always be touched. There are parts of me that may never heal." "I know," James said gently. "I am damaged too. Different damage, but real. We can be damaged together. Help each other heal as much as possible and accept what cannot be healed." They married in 1949 in a small ceremony attended by friends and colleagues. Minji wore a simple dress instead of traditional hanbok. James wore a suit instead of his uniform. The past was present but not defining. Her mother came from Korea for the wedding. She was frail now but determined. When she met James, she studied him carefully, then nodded approval. "He is good man," she said in Korean to Minji. "He sees you clearly. That is rare and precious." Minji's life in Japan with James was not perfect. She still had nightmares, still flinched from unexpected touches, still carried the weight of what had been done to her. But she also had love in work and purpose. They had children, two daughters who grew up bilingual and bicultural. Minji poured into them everything she wished she had known at their age, that they were valuable, that their bodies belonged to them. That strength came in many forms, including the strength to ask for help. She never told them the full truth of what happened to her during the war, but she told them enough, that there had been hard times, that she had survived with help from kind people, that trauma was real but did not have to be defining. As the years passed, Minji watched other comfort women survivors begin to speak out. In the 1980s and 90s, the silence started to break. Women testified about their experiences, demanded apologies and reparations, fought for recognition and justice. Minji admired them, but could not join them. Her healing had taken a different path. Speaking publicly would reopen wounds she had carefully sealed. She supported the movement financially and emotionally, but from the shadows. Instead, she channeled her energy into helping other survivors privately. She worked with organizations that provided counseling and support. She funded education programs for vulnerable young women. She used her resources to create the kind of help she wished had existed for her. James supported this work completely. He had gone into academia teaching international relations and specializing in post-conflict reconciliation. His research was shaped by what he had learned from Minji and other survivors. He became a respected voice on trauma-informed approaches to peace building. In 1995, on the 50th anniversary of the war's end, Minji received an invitation. The Philippine government was holding a ceremony to honor comfort women survivors and the Allied personnel who had liberated them. Would she attend? She discussed it with James and her daughters. It would mean going public about her past in a way she had avoided for 50 years. "What do you want to do?" James asked. Minji thought about the girl who had counted bamboo slats, about Lieutenant Chen and Captain Morrison and Mrs. Kim, about all the women who had not survived to tell their stories. "I want to go," she said. "I want to say thank you, and I want to bear witness." The ceremony was held in Manila in a park that had been built on the site of the old field hospital. Minji stood with a dozen other survivors, most of them elderly, now all of them carrying the same history. Lieutenant Chen was there now, retired Admiral Chen. Captain Morrison had passed away, but her daughter attended in her place. Mrs. Kim, impossibly still working at 83, helped coordinate the event. When it was Minji's turn to speak, she stood at the microphone and looked out at the assembled crowd. Diplomats and veterans, historians and activists, young people who had no memory of the war but understood its importance. She spoke in English, the language that had become her bridge between worlds. "I was 17 when I was taken, 20 when I was liberated, 73 now. Most of my life has been lived after the war, not during it. But those 3 years shaped everything that came after. I came out of that jungle compound expecting to die. I had prepared for it, accepted it. But then an American soldier offered me water instead of violence, asked my name as if it mattered, treated me like a human being when I had forgotten I was one. That moment changed everything. Not because it erased what had been done to me. Nothing could do that, but because it showed me that cruelty was not inevitable, that kindness existed even in the darkest places, that I deserved to be treated with dignity. The people who helped me, the nurses and doctors and translators and ordinary soldiers who did their jobs with compassion, they gave me back my life. Not the life I had before. That was gone forever. But a new life, one where I could heal and love and build something meaningful from the ruins. I stand here today as proof that healing is possible. Not easy, not complete, but possible. The nightmares still come, the memories still hurt, but I have also known 50 years of love and friendship and purpose. I have raised children who are kind and strong. I have helped other survivors find their paths to healing. To the people who liberated us, thank you. Your kindness mattered more than you will ever know. To my fellow survivors, you are warriors. Your survival was resistance. Your healing is victory. To the young people here, remember our stories. Learn from them. Make sure such atrocities never happen again. We were not just victims. We were human beings who endured the unendurable and came out still capable of love. That is what I want remembered. Not just our suffering, but our strength. She stepped away from the microphone to applause that felt like validation. James was crying. Her daughters were crying. Admiral Chen gave her a long hug. "You did good, kid," Chen whispered. "Really good." That evening, there was a private gathering of survivors and liberators. Minji found herself sitting next to a Japanese woman about her age. They exchanged careful greetings. "My father was a soldier in the Philippines," the woman said quietly in Japanese. "I have spent my life trying to understand what he did during the war, what his generation did. I cannot apologize enough for the suffering my country caused." Minji looked at her for a long moment. This woman carried her own trauma, the burden of a nation's sins passed down to children who had nothing to do with them. "Your generation is not responsible for mine," Minji said. "But you are responsible for what happens next, for making sure it never happens again, for teaching truth instead of propaganda, for creating a world where women are not expendable." They talked for an hour, two women from enemy nations finding common ground in their shared determination that the past should teach rather than just haunt. When Minji returned to Tokyo, she felt different, lighter somehow. Speaking publicly had been terrifying, but it had also been liberating. The secret she had carried for 50 years was no longer entirely hers to carry. Others knew, others understood, others cared. She began to write. Not for publication at first, just for herself and her family. Her memories of those years, the details she had never shared, the complexity of survival and healing. Her daughters read it and wept. "Mom, this is important. People need to hear this." Minji was not sure, but she let James show it to a publisher friend who specialized in historical testimony. The friend was interested, very interested. The book was published in 1998. Morning After Darkness, A Comfort Woman's Journey from Captivity to Healing. It became a resource for educators and activists. Minji did interviews, spoke at universities, became a voice for survivors who could not or would not speak for themselves. She was careful always to emphasize that her path was just one among many. Some survivors never healed. Some chose silence, some fought publicly. All choices were valid responses to trauma. As Minji aged, she thought often about the moment of liberation, that instant when Private Walker had said, "You are safe now," and she had not believed him. The slow, gradual process of learning to believe. Healing, she understood, was not a destination, but a practice, something you chose every day. Some days were easier than others. Some days the trauma won. But the important thing was to keep trying. James died in 2003 after a short illness. Minji grieved deeply but found comfort in their daughters and grandchildren. She had built a family, a life, a legacy. The trauma had not defeated her. In 2010, Minji returned to Korea for the first time in decades. She visited her mother's grave and her childhood village. So much had changed. Korea was prosperous now, modern, transformed. But some things remained. The mountains she had climbed as a child, the river where she had played, the school where she had learned to dream of becoming a teacher. She stood outside that school and thought about parallel lives, the one she had lived, the one she might have lived if the war had not happened. Both were real. Both mattered. An old woman approached her. "Can I help you find something?" Minji smiled. "No, I'm just remembering." "Are you from here?" "I was, a long time ago." They talked and Minji learned the woman had been a student at this school around the same time. They might have known each other once, but 70 years had passed and memories faded. Still, they sat together on a bench and shared stories of the old days. The woman had lived through Japanese occupation, the Korean War, decades of poverty and struggle. She had her own trauma, different from Minji's, but just as real. "We survived," the woman said. "That is something." "Yes," Minji agreed. "That is everything." Lee Minji died peacefully in her sleep in 2015. She was 88 years old. Her daughters held a memorial service that was attended by survivors, activists, scholars, and people whose lives she had touched through her work. They spoke about her courage and resilience, about her dedication to helping others, about her refusal to let trauma define her entire life. One of her granddaughters read from the ending of Minji's book, I do not forgive easily or completely. The men who created the comfort women system do not deserve forgiveness. But I have learned to separate my captors from my own life. They took 3 years from me. I refuse to give them the rest. My healing was made possible by people who chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. The American soldiers who liberated me, the medical personnel who treated me with dignity, the friends who supported me, my husband who loved me without needing me to be undamaged. To anyone reading this who carries trauma, healing is possible. Not certain, not easy, but possible. You deserve support and kindness and time to recover, and you deserve to build a life that is about more than just what was done to you. I was a victim for 3 years. I have been a survivor for 70. The survival matters more. After the service, Minji's daughters donated her papers to a research archive dedicated to preserving comfort women testimonies. Her story would live on, teaching future generations about both human cruelty and human resilience. Among her papers was a collection of over 3,000 paper cranes carefully preserved, each one folded during her recovery, during hard times, during moments when she needed to remember that she could create beauty from simple paper and determination. The archive displayed them in a special installation. 3,000 cranes, each one a prayer for peace, each one a symbol of survival, each one proof that even after darkness, morning could come. And in the Philippines, at the park where the liberation ceremony had been held, a memorial was dedicated. It bore the names of known comfort women survivors and a plaque with words Minji had written. They took our freedom, but not our humanity. They took our youth, but not our future. They took our innocence, but not our strength. We survived, we healed, we lived. Remember us not just as victims, but as warriors who refused to surrender our souls. The memorial stood as testimony to suffering endured and survived, to the Americans who had offered help instead of harm, to the slow, difficult, essential work of healing, to the truth that cruelty does not have to be forever, that kindness matters, that morning comes even after the darkest night. Lee Minji's story ended, but her legacy continued. In the survivors she had helped, in the activists she had inspired, in the scholars who learned from her testimony, in her children and grandchildren who carried forward her message that trauma does not have to be the end of the story. She had walked out of that jungle compound expecting death and found life instead. That moment of liberation, that shocking discovery that kindness existed, had set her on a path toward healing that lasted 70 years. It was not a simple story, not a complete triumph. Healing never is. But it was a story of hope persisting despite everything designed to destroy it, of humanity surviving inhumanity, of morning coming after darkness. And that perhaps was enough.